Hello everyone. Welcome again to the next episode of the Soham Roy Show in conversation with great violin maker from Cremona, Italy, Edgar Russ. So Edgar, on our last episode, you were telling me about the experience of building the osmium violin, the world's most precious violin that has been built by you for the Sultan of Oman. So I'm very curious to know that what was the Sultan's reaction when he saw the violin?
I afterwards then I only understood how the whole process was, because when I finished the violin from the Sultan of Oman, that was 10 years ago, 11 years ago, after 8 months, very intense 8 months of working. And then it was, I think, in the beginning of July, there came two bodyguards, tall, like 2 meters high, really nice guys. And they came to pick up the violin, yeah. And we were chatting with them a little bit, and they talked also that they sometimes have to go and pick some very precious things somewhere else. And they came just to pick up the instrument, and then the instrument left, and I actually didn't know where it's going to be delivered, who will deliver it then to the Sultan, and how long this whole process is going to be. That's something I at that time I didn't know anything, and I didn't know who are the musicians who are playing on it. I didn't know anything about it. Yeah. So
Right.
after approximately 6 months, I received an answer that the Sultan had heard the instrument, that it has been played by the first violinist, Italian musician who plays there in the orchestra in Muscat, and then they gave the Sultan the instrument to be played by himself. So he appreciated it very much. And at that time, I just tried to tell them that it would be also possible later on to make another violin, a viola, and a cello to complete it as a quartet, which is not because now I want to exaggerate, but if you look in the past of Antonio Stradivari, I always now take this book here from Axelrod, but the other books as well. You always see that many times these precious instruments have been created in the past for the king of France, let's say, right, in a quartet. So that makes it more a complete unit. Now for common people, the price for something like this seems extremely high and expensive, but people who can afford something like this, they don't throw the money out of the window just to own the most expensive violin. It's rather more behind, on one side, certainly the interest to have a beautiful, outstanding, unique instrument, but then beside that also to make themselves in form of an art object, to make them live forever. Because over the years, if you see precious items, whatever it is, there's always a story behind, about the story about wealthy people who owned this or that. So this is another tiny aspect for people who can afford it. And then the most important aspect is, since they are everything else than throwing out the money out of the window, it's more a question to spend the money in a very wise way in order that that money becomes more. And on classical musical instruments, as well as guitars, it's a very steady price increase of 6-7% per year, and you don't have to do anything. The only thing is that your guitar or your violin is made from a specific person, and then it goes regularly out. It won't make any boosts up and down. That might be if, let's say, a maker is passing away, then everybody wants from this maker his last violin or his last guitar. But that's only a short moment where the price goes up, and then the market is like on stock market. It bounces up and down, and the real price is something in between. So In case the price would be too high, then it will fall down very drastic, and then it comes back to its real price. And that's the reason why on stock market it goes ups and down, or let's say now in cryptocurrency, and then. But the real price is the average. And on musical instruments, for this kind of people, it's a very important aspect to invest in something which is far away from, let's say, stock markets or other factors, and especially when there is a war or there's an uncertain time, this kind of investment is a very steady and a very good way to invest the money. And so that's also a little bit the story behind the osmium violin which I made. It's from my side as a maker, it's just important to make it because it's a challenging aspect. I'm not this wealthy that I can afford this kind of instruments, even so I'm making it. I got to know people who work for Chanel, for Tiffany, and make outstanding jewelry for wealthy people from the Middle East, and also from India, for people from India with some tigers, with all these diamonds in different colors. These people, they don't buy it because they just throw the money out. There is behind a very clear aspect to invest in musical instruments. There's also David Fulton, the biggest shareholder of Microsoft, who has the biggest musical string instrument collection. He doesn't play himself the violin, and he owns hundreds of great instruments. Or there's also in Taiwan the Chi Mei collection. This is the owner of a big company who invented these colored liquid screens for cell phones and for iPhone, and they made a lot of money, and a certain part of his turnover he put it into this foundation, and then he made the Chi Mei collection. And they have from every kind of objects in the world. They have a huge museum. And there's also a very big string instrument collection over there on violins, on guitars. I've been there. It's very interesting in Taiwan. That's a little bit the story. Yeah.
Wow, it's so interesting. I mean, I was just wondering the kind of experience that you had while building this osmium violin, and also you have been through a lot, experienced through a lot of things, lot of emotions, lot of expectations, maybe to just build the instruments and place it to the Sultan. And it's really an experience of a lifetime, I believe.
Yeah, especially a big pleasure was it when I got to know this musician from Muscat, this first violinist, Italian violinist, Luca Blasio. And he came to Italy, he contacted me, we met each other in Mantova, and he told me that it was a big honor even for him to be able to play on that instrument, and it really sounds very well. So this is also, a nice decorated instrument becomes nice and perfect and beautiful, especially when it also sounds great and nice. Otherwise, it's just a, we call it pitch, something which is just beautiful and fancy, but it doesn't really. So then you can make it out of paper, then there's no sense. It must, in itself, must be great and beautiful and outstanding as well, in sound-wise.
Absolutely. And also it's one of a kind of a violin that the violin itself needs protection, like around bodyguards itself, also, I believe.
Yes. It's a pretty big issue, the whole thing with the insurance and all this. It takes a lot of time. We thought that it's much easier to travel with this osmium violin now. And then at the time it was ready, first we had this, the post agency of Austria who took care of it, and everything seemed perfect. And now that we had to move the instrument, then started the issues, because as long as it is moved, of insurance covered everything nice, but where they wanted to expose the instrument, they didn't want to make insurance.
Right.
And there's too much money invested and elaborated into this instrument that we can afford it to lose it in some way. So we have to be sure that it is protected, and that creates a little bit more, the whole thing a little bit more less fluid, and that we can move it free. You know, it's not just like a small item. But certainly for very wealthy people, it isn't actually this much amount of money now. But still, for us, for our kind of living, it would change our life if we would have now to pay back these amounts to which we took in charge to make it happen. And so it's better to have it insured. So it's a bigger issue. I didn't even think about it, but to own it, you have to have the instructor, the insurance, the alarm system, everything, in order that you can be tranquilized and you can fall asleep in the evening.
True.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
The price of the osmium violin gets doubled just because of the fact that it has been made for a purpose and with a lot of expectations and expertise that it required.
Yeah, it's a bigger issue. Yeah.
Right. So Edgar, tell me that there has always been a fascinating debate about the Stradivari, the Guarneri, or the Amati violins. As a master luthier, can you explain the major differences among these violins?
Yes. It all started with Amati. Amati, 15th century, and then there was the entire family of Amati who was working in Cremona, and Andrea Amati, and then all the rest from the Amati family. And at the time that Stradivari was coming to Cremona, in the beginning, he was not a violin maker. He was making inlays in a workshop next to the workshop of Amati. Got to know about these decorations, started slowly in the evening to build his first instruments. One of his first instruments were decorated. And then with 38 years or something, or 40 years, then he started actually being a violin maker. So he changed from decorating instruments and other items, probably even furniture, things like this. Then he started to make instruments. And since he was so good in craftsmanship, he actually brought then this violin making to perfection. And his workshop finished actually then that everything was taken over by his children, his sons. They weren't this successful, and in the workshop with his sons, there was also Bergonzi. Carlo Bergonzi then took over the entire workshop, and that was actually how the Stradivari workshop ended, because the sons probably were already a wealthy family and they didn't have this desire to perform very well. Now, at the end of the living time of Stradivari, there was also Guarneri. Now, when you look at the work itself, Amati was actually very precise working and good working for 15th century, 16th century, Brother Amati and all this. They really had a very precise craftsmanship. They were good, beautiful, a different way of how they created their instruments, much rounder, especially the upper part, the C's, everything very round. If you compare a Amati to a Guarneri, to a Stradivari, the Amati is much rounder. Seems like they used a circle, no, how do you call it, a divider to draw their lines and things like this. Right. While on Stradivari, you see from the shape in the beginning, the outline like Amati, and you call it Amatise, because Stradivari learned from Amati. So it's a little bit rounder. The F-holes were a little bit smaller and a little bit more, let's say, I call it a little bit more Disney style. And then slowly he created his own shape of outline, which is normal. When you start learning something, let's say you start learning to write in school, you imitate your teacher in front of you. So one is learning from one teacher and you automatically start to write like your teacher. And if you somewhere away to another teacher, you will start learning to write like your teacher in another area. And so there are different styles in handwriting, let's say. And then your life will keep up more and more, and maybe you have to write a lot, and you create a little bit your own style in writing, handwriting, or take simply your signature. It's always every signature of every human being is a little bit different. And the same in violin making, or actually it's in every aspect we're doing. It could be cooking or drawing or instrument making. So automatically you give your own things, you are creating your own fingerprint and your own style. And Stradivari changed the style of his making over the years. And when you come to 1710, 1715, something like this, that's actually the golden period of Stradivari, where you can say he reached his maximum of style. And all his instruments, you have to know, were made completely different than how they are nowadays, because nowadays we are having the fingerboard in ebony, 27 millimeters long, string length is longer, we have a different bridge, we have a longer bass bar. And this is caused because we changed the music from Baroque music to more wider halls, because before the instrument was only for the Baroque music. Nowadays we are used to hear these same pieces performed on instruments which are not anymore the Baroque setup. But the Baroque setup wouldn't allow to fill a big hall with thousands of people who are listening. Yeah, at the time they were working, there were no concerts with 1,000 people. Yeah, Milan, which is now, let's say, 2 million. I don't know if it's 2 million or 3 million or maybe 5 million inhabitants. At that time was maybe 50,000 inhabitants. That's Milan, and that was a big city at that time. Yeah, so Cremona was also a big city at that time, but was maybe 15,000 inhabitants, and is now still 70,000. It's a small village actually. Yeah, compared to where you're living. But so Stradivari actually changed this outline because I think that the mouse goes where the cheese is, right? So we say it in Italian. So he changed the outline in order to have a better performance, a better sound. And already at his time, there was already a changing that more and more people were listening, not thousands, but maybe instead of 5 or 10, maybe 20 or 50. So we had to change already something in order to get a better sound. And Stradivari, with his outline, extremely precise, created a very great sounding instrument. Guarnieri actually was, now there are a lot of stories about Guarnieri that he is a drunken idiot and I don't know what, but actually he did violin making how it had been in that years, probably very common, and they didn't focus so much on the details. Especially Stradivari was paid very well because he was working already for the court. It's a little bit like me, who made the instrument for the Sultan of Oman, but this happens now once in my life, and now I created the osmium violin and I don't know who will be the new owner of it. Yeah, but at the time, people couldn't afford to make things so precise, and they need to eat. So Guarnieri just made quick some instruments, and they were made, and they still make them. When you look at them, they are not very precise how they are made. But he created also in the very beginning a rather Stradivarian style, which he immediately started to change. And probably even Guarnieri who was not so attached on these tiny details, was a little bit more flexible in changing and started to create his open C a little bit more. And I believe that this C is responsible for this typical Guarnieri sound. And over the years, then Guarnieri, nobody cared about it. Only after that Paganini played on a Guarnieri, then actually he became famous and people were looking Guarnieri and then they were searching all the Guarnieris and there weren't so many. He didn't make thousands of instruments. I don't actually know how many, but not so many instruments, yeah.
Do you agree on the point, Edgar, that to cater the requirement of a large sound production, the expertise and also the construction of the instrument just got better?
Of course, because we all believe that now we are making historical instruments and we rely on Stradivari and whatever, but I feel it already that we all are in the evolution and the evolution will never stop. So it's obvious that we all are trying to make our best because it's competing with hundreds of other makers and everybody wants to be able to sell his instrument. So we all are in a process of evolution, and as soon as somebody discovers something and then maybe is selling, the other ones are immediately going there, taking a look, how comes, what is he doing that he's selling so good, and I would love to sell as much as my competitor. So it's very human, and that's normal. And we cannot avoid this evolution. This is more than normal. This is even animals have an evolution. Everybody is in the process of evolution. So I think this is just the process. It goes pretty slow, and at least for a human lifetime, it seems that nothing is changing. But at least in my 40 years of violin making, I have already the impression that things are already changing. Yeah,
Right. That's very true. And also there has been people related to music and violin playing are very inquisitive about the fact that there is something mysterious about the Stradivari varnish. So can you just put light on that?
There's actually it's a long story because for many years I heard about it and people are always talking about this mystery about the Stradivari varnish. And now for those who believe that they want to discover the Stradivari varnish, I would say they're already a little bit late. I have here up there the red book, Stradivari varnish from Peter Greiner and Brigitte Brandmeier. Brigitte Brandmeier is actually the scientist and she's working in a museum in Munich, Germany. And Peter Greiner is a German violin maker. And together they created this book. And it's a pretty expensive book, 600 or 800 euro, this book. But they don't give a recipe because that wouldn't be very scientific if they would give a recipe. But if you read the book, and I had to translate the presentation of this book, which lasted for 2 days here in Cremona. And they were invited all the violin makers of Cremona and all the students of the violin making school. It was actually a pretty interesting presentation about this, what they discovered. Now, when you hear these stories about the secret, there was no secret. They didn't do a secret for purpose. They were just working as a matter of fact, and the process was going on around them. And they probably went to like a pharmacy or a drugstore or something where they bought their ingredients for the varnish, and then they went back home and they put them together, or maybe they even put those things already together in the pharmacy or in this drugstore, I don't know. But the point is they used oil varnish. For many, many years, people were already complaining or fighting spirit varnish or oil varnish. Now we know it was oil varnish. because spirit alcohol was too expensive at the time. That was far too expensive to put it as a varnish on an instrument. And linseed oil was very common used. They varnished windows, doors, where they have the horses in front. I don't know how you call it in English, but they painted them like this, and they realized to finish them also super nice and super shiny and with super nice results. So there was a lot of tradition of oil varnish, actually. But the main problem was actually that this oil varnish, as long as it is a window or a furniture, it's not a big issue, because it penetrates into the wood before it is actually drying. It's not drying, it's polymerizing with the sun, okay? So it makes a chemical reaction and then gets sticky and then hard. When you apply a transparent varnish on a piece of wood, especially if it's flamed maple, and it penetrates inside, it's not really nice looking, because then the flames don't move anymore, but it gets like blocked like a tiger. Yeah.
Right.
And this is not very nice. You don't want that. You want to keep this great effect of the wood. You want to keep it alive. So in 1686, they discovered a new wood preparation. And that wood preparation is a very, very thin layer of protein. And this protein is changing the structure of the surface in order that the oil varnish doesn't penetrate into these tiny small holes. So, and that was actually the big secret, which we now see as a secret, but it's actually just, it was just a concept. You can, I made it on my channel. You can make it with casein and calcium and some water, and then you apply it, you take it off, nothing is left on the wood, and then you can varnish, and the oil varnish doesn't penetrate inside. And this has also a special side effect, that the surface becomes slightly harder than the rest of the wood. And this, for the sound, is actually extremely convincing. It's I started to do this in 2005 or 2006, this wood preparation. And the first instrument I made it, I was so impressed that afterwards I also applied it inside in the instrument and also on cellos. And now, over the years, I use it on all my instruments, inside and outside. And I think it is definitely this secret what people are talking about. And in the book, actually, then you can also see how they took up some varnish chip-offs, and then they made some special microscope. They took some pictures. It's very interesting. And then how the layers of varnish is created, and first the yellow varnish, then the color varnish, and then a thin coat of yellow varnish on top of it. And that's definitely creating this magic about it. But also the other makers around used it, from Piacenza, Guadagnini, in Brescia. They used it here in Cremona. It was just something they discovered, and they didn't leave it as a big secret in their making. They just used it. And you can see it then on the instruments from the past. Before 1686, you can see Stradivarius, that the wood was actually different looking, and then later on, just for like 1 year and tap, and then it's changing. And that was actually another ingredient for Stradivari to create even better sounding instruments. But also the other one, the
trade-off was going on with Stradivari while he was just making his violins? Like there was a constant trial and error involved in the making.
I didn't get the question, sorry, or the once
Yes.
again.
So I was just saying that there was a constant trade-off going on with the Stradivari just because of the fact that he was involved in just figuring out what exactly was the perfect measure.
Yeah, he was constantly increasing his quality. Yes.
Right, right.
Yeah.
This is so enlightening to listen to all of your facts and all that you told about the violins, the expertise of that people, of those great masters, as a matter of fact. And we'll be continuing our discussion on the next episode of the show. Stay tuned.